Hello and welcome. I'm Tracy Z.
And I'm Fred Rui.
And we're here for Note Investing 101. So this has been a series we've had a lot of fun putting together.
Yeah, we've had several. This is like our 8th episode, I think, if I can count to 8, and I don't have my calculator with me. But yeah, just trying to cover different aspects of the note industry, people that are interested about it, want to know the basics, how to get involved, what's going on. So this side, today we're going to kind of switch to the investor side a little bit as far as due diligence.
Yeah, we've talked about marketing and taking your note business online and partials and how to create notes if you were doing real estate. But today we're going to say, how do you look and analyze a deal if you want to buy it or you want to refer it on to another investor? So in this situation, we're talking about notes that already exist. And we think we'll start off with a disclaimer like we normally do, basically just letting you know that we are not attorneys or financial advisors or tax attorneys or accountants, and we definitely encourage you to seek the competent legal, tax, and financial advice, and past performance doesn't always guarantee future performance. But we can say we've been doing this for a combined 50 years, and we've seen a lot of things over the years, a lot of different economies, and there's just some basics that you really want to be sure you're doing when you're looking at buying a note or referring a note.
Yep. And before we get started, you saw the message, click like, share, hit the bell, phone a friend, carrier pigeon, whatever you got to do. Certainly helps us out.
Now.
Owls? Is it owls since Harry
Carrier
Potter
owls.
or something? Okay. All right. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start with basically, again, we're going to go over due diligence. So this is actually looking at the note. The seller said yes. And what are we going to do now? And let's start with the 3 Ps.
So the 3 Ps are the cornerstone of deal analysis and due diligence in note investing. So the first P is people. So you want to take a look at, some people call it the payer, it's the person, the borrower, the person making the payments. So that's a key part of it. But people also includes the seller that is selling you the note, as we'll get into here a little bit more.
Yep. The second one is property. And basically, this is the asset. This is what the note is tied to. Is it a house? Is it single family residence? Is it multifamily? Is it commercial? How much? What is the property as far as the value of the property? What's the condition of the property? What area is it in? Not just neighborhood as far as are there good schools there, but is it in a judicial versus non-judicial state as far as how easy or difficult it may be to foreclose if they stop paying me to get that property back.
In the banker's terms, they talk about the 3 C's a lot, right? And collateral being one of them. And collateral in this case is the property. So the property is what you could take back if they did not pay the promissory note. So that is a very important piece. And another piece of the property is also, is it financeable through conventional means? We see a lot of seller financing on hard to finance properties. So you might have a home with excessive acreage. You might have mobile home and land. You might have just a mobile home. So you might have commercial, you might have mixed use. So these are all the things you want to know what the collateral is, because that will make a big difference in how you perform your due diligence and also what price you want to pay. And then the third P.
Paperwork.
Yeah.
It's your favorite.
Well, that's my specialty. I don't know if anybody loves paperwork, but it's certainly how I got my start in the note business on the closing side. And the paperwork is what gives you the ability to enforce your rights and when you buy that note. So the paperwork is very important because you want to make sure it exists, it's been done correctly, and it gets transferred correctly. So you have the full ability to enforce just like the original holder of that note. It also is a way for you to verify some of the things that people tell you, as we'll talk about in our segment today when we get to the due diligence dozen.
Yeah, I also look at paperwork as including ancillary things like insurance.
Yeah.
Is there insurance on the property and things like that? That kind of paperwork being in line, or the taxes current as far as checking that kind of paperwork.
Yeah, so paperwork is really the basic paperwork. Is when we start out, we like to see a copy of the closing statement. Some people call it the HUD-1 settlement statement, but it's that accounting of all the monies, the sales price, the down payment, how things were handled. And then, of course, you've got the promissory note. very important. And then the other main piece of paperwork is the mortgage or the deed of trust. In some states, a contract for deed. And then there's other types of paperwork too. We have a whole transaction checklist of all the standard pieces of paperwork, but that's usually where we start with the paperwork. And then once somebody says yes, you get them to sign an option agreement. Then we start performing that formal due diligence. So some of this due diligence you can perform without cost, and some does incur cost. And so it's important to stage it so you're doing things first that don't incur a lot of cost when you're doing a deal analysis. So I like to call this the due diligence dozen. It's 12 questions that every note investor should answer about their transaction. So you want to kick us off with the first one?
Yeah, it was better because Tracy called it the Dirty Dozen, which I thought was a really cool homage to the Western thing. But I'm like, oh, that sounds too negative.
Yeah.
Because they're not all bad questions, I mean, so anyway.
Well, I think they're like important, like, get the job
like
done.
Getting
questions.
down and dirty.
Yeah,
okay, all right, that's fair.
But
That's
it's
fair.
all right. I changed it. I made it more vanilla. We called it the due diligence dozen.
Well, that sounds very boring now. So. All right, first one of these 12. How long has the buyer been making payments, and are they current? So this one's pretty basic. Have they been living in the property for 2 years, for 2 months, for 20 years? What has been? How long have they been making payments each and every month, hopefully? And are they current? Are they up to date on their payments? Did they fall behind? If they did fall behind, have they made it up? This is particularly true in the last year. There were some people that fell behind during COVID. Surprisingly enough, the numbers don't show as many people as you would think necessarily in this environment. But, a lot of people, given a financial crisis or financial problem, they will let a lot go before they let the payments go on their home. It's just one of those things that they never, ever want to lose. So first question, how long has the buyer been making payments, and are they current?
Yeah, and another word we use a lot in our industry for that is seasoning. So you hear somebody say, oh, how long has the note been seasoned? So, cooking, seasoning adds the spice. But in note investing, seasoning makes it a more secure investment because it gives a chance for you to see that the buyer has been making those payments and hopefully will continue to make them. So a note that has 1 month payment made on it, or a note that has 12, obviously one that has 12 is going to be considered more valuable and might offset some other maybe not so positives. But when we look at it, we start adding them all together and in our due diligence. So that is the first one. The second question is, it's related to the payment history. Is there a servicer collecting those payments and validating the payments? So it's more common now to have a third-party servicer that collects the payments from the buyer-borrower, keeps track of the interest in principal. Maybe they also do reserves for taxes and insurance, maybe not. And they send out things like 1098s at the end of the year to show about the interest. So sometimes, though, it's great when there is a third-party servicer. We always suggest people use a third-party servicer because they take away that headache, kind of like a property manager for a landlord. Well, a server serves like a note manager for note investors. But one thing that we see a lot in seller financing is maybe the seller sold to the buyer and they didn't have a servicer, a third party collect the payments, and that buyer's just making the payments direct to the seller. Now it gets a little bit more complicated to validate or verify that payment history. So that's where some paperwork comes in. So if that's the case, then we try to get the seller to give some kind of proof of payments. Now it's a little easier now, right? Because everybody banks online. They can go online. They can usually get copies of checks they've deposited into their account. They don't have to show everything in their account, but if they could just get copies of those deposits that were made from the buyer, that would be one way to validate a payment history if a servicer wasn't involved. But if there's a servicer involved, then obviously you want to get a copy of that payment history and take a look at it and make sure that it's paying like it has been represented. Mm-hmm. All right, next one.
Okay. By the way, if you're watching this live, you can type a question in the comment box and we'll be glad to answer it. We're just going over our 12 questions, but if you have something else you want to throw out there, you're more than welcome to throw out a question there. The next one is, do the documents match the terms presented for the sale? Not a real long one here, not a real tough one to talk about. Basically, when someone says, hey, I have a note and the property sold for $125,000 and I carried back a $100,000 note and I wrote the note at 10%. And that was 30-year amortization, and the payments are going to be $877.57. we're making sure that all those numbers match what's really in the documents. Just because somebody told us that doesn't make it true. Just because someone gave us the address of the property or the legal description of the property necessarily doesn't make it true. So when we look at the documents, we are presented this property that sold at this price that has a value of X, that all the documents match that. Now, they may have said the value is $125,000 and the value's gone up. Well, that's part of our due diligence, is to make sure the value is at least what we think it is, which is what it sold. If it went up, great. If it went down, that's a problem. That doesn't mean we still can't do the deal. It just means the value that we are presented is not the value today. So basically, we're just cross-checking what was said up front with what the paperwork backs up, because at the end of the day, only the paperwork matters. I don't care what anybody said. It's, oh, they gave me $20,000 down, and then it turned out it was all sweat equity, and they rebuilt a fence and a roof. And well, that's not really a down payment. It is, and but it was not in the form of a cash lump sum being handed over. And but if they did it right, then and someone did have sweat equity, there's probably equity in the property now, and we can work with that.
There's another piece of the documents too that's really important, and that is, what are the terms? Because sometimes we see some really crazy stuff written into seller finance notes, and they don't always use the boilerplate Fannie Freddie documents. So it's very important to take a look at those documents and just read them, and anything unusual will definitely stick out. So the normal things are like what Fred had mentioned, the interest rate, the payment amount, when the note is due. But perhaps they wrote it at 0% interest rate and they forgot to say, or that 0% interest rate, or maybe they wrote it at interest only payments. That's where I was going with this. Sorry. Maybe they wrote it interest only payments, where the payment just covers interest. It doesn't amortize or cover principal, but they forgot to put an all due and payable date in there, which means those interest only payments would just go forever, right? To eternity. Now, there would be a way to buy that note, but you would certainly want to know that up front. Or perhaps it says in there that they gave the buyer, gave the seller a life estate, and so that they could continue living there. Or perhaps this is the buyer has the first right of refusal if the seller decides to sell the note. Those are all deals that you can still do. You will just handle them differently and also price them differently. So very important to read those documents, because they are not always conforming bank paper. All right, next question. Are the real estate taxes paid current? This is such a basic question, so easy to answer. You just go online to the tax assessor for the county where the property is located. And this is something in almost all counties now you can pull up and see whether taxes are current. Now, of course, when you order title, which we'll get into later, it will also tell you that. But don't wait around for title. This is one of the very first due diligence steps that I do, even when somebody's just calling in for a quote. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about why it's so important to make sure real estate taxes are current?
Because otherwise you're going to have to pay them.
That's right. Real estate taxes actually take lien priority over mortgages and deeds of trust. So they get their money first. So those are the real estate property taxes. Very important to see that those are being paid current. Now, I know that there's extenuating circumstances, and it can take a couple of years before they can go to tax, get a tax lien, and go to tax sale and get a tax deed. So you have time, but there are people who have lost their lien priority because of those taxes. It also indicates what the buyer's ability to pay. And it's very important too, if there are escrows collected, reserves 1/12 for taxes and insurance, that the servicer, if they had been collecting those, they're paying the real estate taxes. So a delinquent real estate taxes, it's time to start thinking about that. We also use that sometimes as a negotiating tool to seller.
Yeah, for sure.
So if the seller doesn't realize that those taxes aren't current, you can explain that to them, and maybe they can be deducted off the purchase price.
And they typically are. Usually a seller, when you tell them that, they don't expect you to pay them unnecessarily. So they usually take them out of their proceeds, which we've done at closing. The next thing is the property insured for fire and other hazards, which these kind of go hand in hand a little bit, because if someone is delinquent, if it's not serviced, if they become delinquent in their taxes, it's not uncommon for them to be delinquent in other things. The biggest one being next in line would be if they're insured the property. Is super, super important, because, and we have a story about property that burned down actually, but when that property burns down, we're insured from the standpoint, it's our money on the line. I mean, so we want to get our money back out of it. So it's important that there's insurance on that property. We are the lien on that property, so we will get what we're due, and then any remainder is obviously for the person that owns the property. but you definitely need to make sure that you've got insurance on there.
You definitely do. So you're asking for the declaration page. It will show your buyer, borrower as the primary insured, and then it'll show the lender, the lien holder, as the mortgagee or loss payee. And if there's more than one lien holder, they're on there as well. Sometimes sellers on seller financing don't realize they need to do that. So a lot of times you'll get the deck page and it doesn't show the mortgagee on there, the loss payee. And so you'll have to get that added. And after you close and you send over the paperwork, then you let the insurance company know that they need to change that to you or add that to you, whatever entity you use to buy the note. As I'm shocked that so many people buy notes and they don't check if the taxes and insurance are current. As Fred mentioned, we have a story. It's on our website at noteinvestor.com. And if you just look up Burn to Learn, you will hear the whole story about it. And we made a conscious choice to close that note because the insurance was current and it just lapsed and the buyer was supposed to get it.
It was just over a weekend.
It was supposed to get it right back on. And it actually burned down over the weekend. And that poor buyer, lost their property. Of course, they're not motivated to make payments on a property. Normally, if they'd had insurance, it would have paid off their loan, would have paid us off as the lien holder, the note investor, but it wasn't. And there was a whole thing that we had to do to get through that process. So we won't go into it here, but I'm just telling you, it is a funny story.
Now,
in retrospect, but it does happen. So you definitely important to do that. Mm-hmm. All right. Next up is there an updated title report? So you can get a title policy and then you can update it. Or if there's no title policy, you can get a new title commitment. But you want to know that your buyer's vested in title, that the lien, the mortgage or deed of trust has been recorded. It's in the lien position that it's supposed to be in. And the person selling to you is the one that's currently owns the lien, because we've seen a lot of notes and mortgages transfer hands more than once. And so you want to make sure, just like a deed transfers title property, recorded assignments of deed of trust or mortgage are what transferred along with an endorsement of the note. So please don't buy notes without getting an updated title report. I prefer title insurance. Some people are more comfortable or are comfortable just getting a report without the insurance, but definitely don't do deals without title reports. That's my opinion.
Next one, keeping in line with title, is, what is the lien position and what else is owed on the property? This is very important for several reasons. One is that if things go bad, it determines the order of which people are going to be paid back, for lack of a better way to put it. So if there's a foreclosure, you want to be first in line because there's not going to be enough money at the end of the day typically. So do you want to get paid first, or do you want to be in the very back of the line hoping what's left over? So if you think you're buying a first person note and then you do a title and you do everything else and you find out yes, you are first, but then also what's behind you. You can see other liens behind you, and they don't necessarily, like Tracy talked about the taxes, but there are other liens that could be behind there. They can be placed on the property. You, in theory, don't have to worry from a recovering your money standpoint of the liens that are behind you, but you do need to worry from what's the status of this payer that liens are stacking up behind. Maybe they took out a second to improve the house. Hey, that's great. There's more equity. My first is sitting in a better position. But maybe there's been problems and people are starting to lien the property, and that's just an indication that I could have a problem a little bit later. But you do want to make sure that you're especially getting in the liens that you want. You hear a lot out there about people buying seconds, which means that they are behind a first. That means there's somebody in front of them. So like if you take something very popular like an 80-10-10, it's the payer got an 80% first mortgage. They had 10% to put down. That left 10% in a second, and maybe the seller carried back a little 10% second. Well, you have that, but you can buy that, but you have an 80% first in front of you that has priority. So if something goes wrong on your note or they stop paying, the only way to initiate a foreclosure or something is to not jeopardize the note in front of you, which means you have to pay that off. You have to take care of that. You have to make that note good, make payments on it if they allow that. So so you really have to take a look at that and understand what is the position you think you're buying, what does the paperwork show that you're buying or verify that you're buying, and then what do you want to do if there's other things going on.
Also, you wanted to, and Fred mentioned this, but I wanted to point it back out. You're looking at how much is that buyer, borrower have encumbered against the property. So we talk about loan to value, LTV. There's something called CLTV, which is cumulative loan to value or combined loan to value. And that's all the debts that that buyer owes against the property compared to what the property is worth. Because if people get underwater, meaning they owe more than what the property is worth, they don't have as many options because they don't have much equity, and they're much less likely to continue paying if they hit financial hard times. So very important to know your lien position and other liens on the property. It also affects you if you're going to take a deed in lieu of foreclosure, even if liens are behind you, if you're in first position. That will also affect you if you're going to take a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You may still have to foreclose those out. All of that should work into understanding your purchase. Now, we like to buy performing notes, and we hope none of that ever happens, but you always have to prepare for the worst case scenario and know what your outs are. You have exit strategies. I recently did a presentation on 15 different exit strategies. So you have all these different exit strategies, and knowing your lien position is one step towards knowing which exit strategy is the best. All right, next up. Is it my turn?
It's your turn.
Is it my turn?
Yep, that
All
one was
right.
yeah.
So who is the current holder or seller of the note being purchased? So we talk about the buyer, the payer, and knowing your payer, who's making payments. Are they gainfully employed? But another piece of that is, who are you buying the note from? There are a lot of sellers who are great sellers, and you buy notes from them maybe once or multiple times, and they are wonderful people. There are also sellers that are pretty savvy, and they will not always reveal all the things that they should, which is why you perform your due diligence. Or you might find out there was a contract for deed seller that was unscrupulous and actually got in trouble with several states for taking advantage of buyers and not doing full disclosures. So that doesn't happen very often, but it's one of those situations you should Google the name of your seller and just see if they have any litigation or outstanding problems that might carry over to you. Now, a title report can tell you that related to this piece of property, that's security for your note. However, you might want to look at that seller if they are creating multiple notes in general, just so you know your seller like you know your buyer borrower. And that is something that we didn't think about so much in the past, but now as people have gotten more savvy and that sort of thing, it's a very important piece of your due diligence to do a little bit of research on your seller.
I'm going to throw in a bonus question here right in the middle of it. Karen just typed in Facebook. When a note turns to non-performing NP and is probably across the country from you, how do you handle disposing of the property after foreclosure? It's a great question, Karen. Usually my first call is to a local realtor. And I usually at this point, depending, strategy, how much you have in it, what it's worth, but it sounds like, you've complete, after the foreclosure aspect, I'm usually looking for what's the quick sale. So what is my as-is price right there? If I want to sell this tomorrow, saying, hey, to a realtor, especially in this market, it's probably not as much of a problem. But I tell the realtor, going, look, we all have that, under normal situation, what could I sell it for tomorrow? Meaning, this is a $100,000 property, but if you sell it for $80,000, it's going to go like that. Okay, that gives me that number. Can I live with that 80? Yes, I can. Great, let's do that. Otherwise, maybe I play for the longer strategy, which is, let's maybe fix a few things, try to get the 110, 120 for the property, or maybe I list it for sale and I carry back another note. If I like the property, if I'm not scared from it overall, and I think, hey, this is still a pretty good property, I got it back, I'm in at the right price, that may be your best strategy. You bought it as a note originally, maybe hoping to make it work out, maybe hoping that they would get their payments. They didn't, you took the property back. So unless there's something new that came up about the area or new that came up about the property, it might be a good idea to go, you know what, let's just take this opportunity to offer this for sale by owner, get a realtor to help you there since you are at a distance, and just go with that.
One thing also that's important about that question is when a note turns non-performing, then the first thing you've got to do is work with your servicer if you have a servicing company, and they will normally hire an attorney to start the foreclosure process. We like to try to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure whenever possible, some kind of cash for keys, and either you get it back through that means or through an actual foreclosure, which can take some time and energy and expense. That's why we like the deed in lieu of foreclosure. So all that has to happen before you can start worrying about disposing of the property. Fred and I just recently listed a property and we did the flat fee so we could get on the MLS. And so it was just a flat $299 fee. We offered to pay a buyer's agent 2.5%. And wow, that we had access to the MLS and it was a fantastic response without having quite as big of expense. We've also used Facebook Marketplace to dispose of and advertise properties. Used to be Craigslist was a big, but now we see more action from Facebook Marketplace. But if you're worried about the real estate agent's commission, that flat fee can be good. It's a little, I still think if you're long distance, which is what Karen's question was, a full service real estate agent is going to be
You're going to want somebody to manage it for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So great question, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah. Next question. What is the current value? No, I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to go with it anyway. Where is the original note and will it be delivered at closing is the next question. So basically, real simple. I mean, the note is key. It's an original note. It was signed. You know, it's not a copy. It's not a Xerox, if you will. It's not a fax. It's not an email. It is just as powerful as a check. It will be actual ink on there. You know, we've done the spit test where you kind of put your, spit on there and make sure that it actually smears that it's not a copy, especially as copiers got better and better over the years. Because, so usually when I'm dealing with the seller, I ask, do they have the original note? Is it in a safe place? It should be in their safe deposit box. Some people have it, their attorney keeps it for them, or it's in an important file in their desk, wherever it is, but they should have that. And will it have the ability to be delivered at closing? If it's not, then we can do like a lost note affidavit where we actually have everybody sign like a new note saying, hey, we all recognize the note got lost, but we all agree on what the terms are, and we're just signing another copy. It's like a check. They're going to endorse it. They're going to endorse that note over to us, and then we're going to keep it, and we're going to have that. So yeah, you want to make sure that they have the original note, and are they able to deliver it at closing? Yeah.
This is another one of those things that I've found new note investors just don't even think about, that you need the original, because promissory notes are negotiable instruments like Fred mentioned. And so a negotiable instrument like a check, you've got to have the original. You can't present a copy of a check to the bank and think they'll honor it. And it also has to be endorsed, as Fred mentioned. So, and it also allows you to be something attorneys call holder-induced course, HDIC, which gives you some benefits as a holder. So that original note is very important. We're not saying you can never buy a note if it's lost, but as Fred mentioned, then there's different steps that you go through. This is one of those things I'm really surprised people haven't keyed on more. And I think it's now that it's becoming more common to have to present a note if you have to go for foreclosure or something like that, that people are becoming more aware of it. Now, that game Where in the World is Waldo, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to play the Where in the World is the Note game, especially with these sellers. So we have a whole process of how we do that. So that is that. So the next question is.
Wait, I got a bonus question.
You got a bonus question.
It's just housekeeping. Christopher asked, do you have these dirty dozen in a document I could download some more, or should I have been taking notes? I got two things for you, Christopher. One is, since you're on the YouTube, because I can tell by your little logo there, if you skip forward to all those little blue bars that have been popping up, those actually have all the questions. But in the future, in the next couple of days, what we'll do is we'll actually time code it. And if you go back to the comments, you'll see them all right in there as well.
And they will also be part of a blog at noteinvestor.com/101, where we post all of these series.
Yep. And then I'm going to, one of the questions is, if the original note is lost and the buyer refuses to sign a replacement note affidavit, how do you resolve this?
This is where, it's a great question. Great question, Christopher. I can tell you know what you're talking about. So that is the first course of action we like to do if the original note is lost, as Fred had mentioned, is get a replacement note that the borrower signs and get a lost note affidavit from both parties. If they don't, then I would suggest that you talk with an attorney and find out in that state how tough it is to foreclose without the original note. Or if you know that seller, perhaps they can do some kind of indemnification as part of their affidavit if should you ever have a problem, that they would buy it back. I don't normally like to rely on those. I like to know that we would be able to take care of the situation if we needed to. So some people do buy with just a lost note affidavit signed by the seller without a replacement note, but it really does depend on the state and whether you think you're going to have to foreclose or not. I mean, obviously it's a much bigger problem on a non-performing note than a performing note as well. So that would be a case-by-case scenario.
Yep.
All right. The next one is, what is the current value of the property? Well, that's your collateral. So what is the current value of property? It's so important when we talk about people, property, paperwork. What's the value of the property? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Right now, everybody seems to be going up, and that's wonderful. But we lived through 2008 when we bought deals at 50% investment to value, and then we were 100% investment to value because of falling value. So really know the current value of the property. Most of us will do some kind of analysis online, and then most of us will order either a BPO, a broker's price opinion, or a drive-by appraisal to get a third-party validation. Now, if it's not local to you, you can't drive by it. So that's why we use these third parties. There's all kinds of third parties that provide that service. They're not all created equal. So you definitely want to do some of your own little research on comps as well, but get a reliable local real estate agent or appraiser to give you an opinion of value. A lot of that depends too how much you're investing, how much equity the buyer has, but all of that is a very important question.
Yep. Next question, by the way, is how much equity does the buyer pay or have? So, this comes off the last question. Okay, what's the value of the property and what do they owe? The more equity they have in the property, whether that occurred because the property value went up or it occurred because they've been living there a long time, making payments for a long time, and there's a lot of seasoning, as we said earlier. However that equity has occurred, the more equity that there is there, the less likely you are going to have to foreclose on the property, because in the event that they get into a situation where they can't afford the property or they need to move, they're going to sell that property to gain some of the equity back themselves in cash and leave. So the more equity equals a safer investment. This is also true when you start looking at products that fluctuate in price a lot. So how much equity you want to see in something on a single family residence versus how much equity you want to see if it's a piece of raw land, you want to see a greater commitment. So if I'm going to buy a note on raw land, I want to see a really big down payment that they are committed to this land, that they're not going to walk away. Plus also land prices can fluctuate a lot faster than a single family residence, especially when we're looking at an economy that could go down. They don't go up twice as fast, but they do come down twice as fast. So
funny how that happens.
Yeah. So basically, you're just going to look and see how much equity. It's one of those indicators among many of the things we talked about as far as credit and all the other stuff, but it's one indicator of, what's going on in the property.
Well, that is what brings us to our last question in the dozen. And that is, what is the credit worthiness of the buyer? And are there any bankruptcy filings? So how do you check bankruptcy filings? Well, you can go to pacer, pacer.gov, and you can sign up to have a free account, and they charge like 10 cents a page for the data that comes back. That's one way that you can see if they have bankruptcy filings. For the credit worthiness of the buyer, depending on the seller, they might have a copy of the buyer's credit report. They may not. And so you may have to perform your own research as well. If you're creating the note, it's a little easier to get a copy of the buyer's credit report because the buyer's involved and they can give that to you. If you're working with institutional investors that you're referring the note to, you don't have to worry about this part because they will take care of that for you. When they are ready, they will do a soft pull on that payer's credit and check that as well. If you are buying for your own investment, then you're going to need to network with somebody that has the ability to give you that information legally as well, according to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. But that buyer's credit, how they paid their bills in the past, is a very good indicator of how they will pay their bills in the future. Now, sometimes buyers get into a little trouble and then life circumstances, and then they get themselves out. But they have habitually been foreclosed upon, short sales, evicted for not paying their rent, don't pay their car, don't pay what was that one that used to always show up on credits that we used to laugh about?
Swiss Colonies catalog, like where you bought like sausages and stuff like that. That was used to be
a big one where we see
they would definitely
liens and collections. Yeah. But somebody normally has good credit, but they've had some problems with medical bills, those sort of life-changing situations, but that's why all of this comes together. So when you're looking at these 12 questions, one question out of the 12 isn't a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. It's a balancing of the scales. So, tell me something, okay, if not a big down payment, that's a negative. Oh, but they've been paying 24 months. That's a positive. Maybe their credit's not perfect, but they put a nice 20% down payment. So you're constantly balancing the scales because you're buying notes that may have already fallen out of some banker's box guidelines. So you're looking for the value where other people might not have seen it, but you still want it to be an investment that you can recoup if something does happen. So I always call it balancing of the scales. So, you want to look at, just think of the old pros and cons list. When I'm doing a deal and we will present it back and forth to each other, it's like, what are the pros and what are the cons? And do the pros outweigh the cons? And do they have offsetting factors? Because if you look at the list and it's all a con or negative, right, then that's not a deal you want to do. So you definitely have to understand what are your outs, what are your exit strategies, and how you're going to make the deal profitable, and what you're going to do if for some reason the buyer doesn't pay. Now, that's not to scare you, because that's the great thing about this business, right?
Yeah, it's what I love about this business is that, look, we went over 12 things, and let's just assume that all 12 of those things, on a traditional conventional loan, if one of those 12 does not hit whatever benchmark it has to, it's done. I don't care if there's, 40% equity in the property, like, nope, you didn't hit this mark, so you don't get to do it. That's why we're able to buy notes. That's why this industry exists. That's why roughly between 6 and 8% of all, or 6% of all real estate notes, or excuse me, 6% of real estate transaction involve owner carryback financing. It's just what it ends up being. I mean, a lot of stuff falls through the cracks that are good people that might have good credit, but they're self-employed or just started their own self-employment, but they've got this big down payment. The banker's like, well, I don't care. There's no track record here. You haven't been employed long enough. So that's what's great about this industry, all the offsets.
So we love the note investing world. We're glad that you joined us here today. We'd like to encourage you to do a couple of things. If you want to learn more, you can go to noteinvestor.com. And if you go to noteinvestor.com/101, you can enjoy the Note Investing 101 series, and you can also sign up to get notifications. And we have a blog and a newsletter and a bookstore and all kinds of great information. Over 300 articles now.
Yeah, we have too much stuff.
We have lots of good stuff. And then, of course, we ask you to like or share here on Facebook or YouTube. Hit the bell so you get notified when we go live. And then we also have noteinvestingtools.com, which is where we sell our note buyer sites and a couple other resources. We're all about tools, training, and support for note investors.
Yep.
So thanks. We appreciate it. Happy note investing.
Thanks.